Hey everyone. So some exciting updates to go over. And where I want to start is with this pull request into the stable baselines contribution library. So I guess you would pronounce this Cronian, but this particular developer worked to add in a Maskable PPO policy to the stable baselines code base. And this is really helpful because I realized part of what was happening within my algorithm was that if you remember from one of my previous videos when I was doing the DQN algorithm, so if we jump into here, what I was actually doing was some level of masking when it came to determining what moves were and weren't valid. So if we go actually into this DQN algorithm, you'll see that in our select action function, I was passing in these inputs, so things like the number of moves that are available, the number of switches, and then I was using those to determine whether moves were or weren't valid, and I was manually setting the expected value of those actions to -infinity, so that way they would never be selected. So effectively, I was masking the actions so that moves that were invalid would never be selected. But with the old PPO bot, what I was finding was that it was actually choosing the random move a lot. And because of that, it was learning a lot slower than if it were only picking actually valid moves. Because what happens when it picks a random move is that basically it disassociates the reward from that action with the action that's actually taken. So it's really harmful to the learning process. Whereas now with this action masker, what we can do is we can pass in a function to mask our environment. Currently, I have it set so that it'll only mark the 4 main Pokemon attack moves as available, up to however many are actually available, and then the number of switches. And so it's really it's honestly decreasing the action space by a lot, because if you take a look at the action to move function, which I pulled from its parent kind of into here just for logging purposes, you can see that we actually have, 18 different actions that we can do. And so I've lowered it to 8. So it's a much smaller action space. And not only that, but now we know that when we are selecting a move, it is actually corresponding to the correct learning for that move and the correct reward. So effectively, I just made it start to learn a lot more efficiently. I guess there is the caveat, like it won't learn to like mega evolve now, for example, but I figure that's a pretty advanced technique, and I don't really think I need to be too concerned about that right now. I think if it just gets good at switching and doing, ordinary attack moves at sort of a sensical pattern, I think it would be much better than it currently is. So I added in that Maskable PPO network, and that's now what's being used both in the PPO bot and then also in the live PPO bot, so when it's being used against actual players. So some exciting news in terms of benchmarking. If we look over at what it's been like, I added back in the speed stat. I was playing around with that for a little bit. The important benchmarks are really down here with action masking. So it won 1,062 out of 1,827 battles against a max damage player and only 50k training steps. And when we did the actual testing against a max damage player, that represented about a 78% win rate. So that's, in only 50k steps, outperforming what it was previously doing. And, we can see here, for example, in 75k training steps, it was previously only winning 66% of the time. So this is a really huge increase on more efficient learning. And then if we look over at how it did over training at 200,000 steps, it won over 50% of the battles against the SimpleHeuristicsPlayer. Now, this is actually the first time any of my bots have beat the SimpleHeuristicsPlayer at over 50%. It won at about 53%. So this is really huge. This means that the bot is potentially the best it's ever been. And, it did that in 200,000 training steps, which is only 957 seconds. So even less time than I was training bots for on the DQN algorithm, and it's already doing better. So this was super encouraging to me. I really feel like switching to PPO has been the right decision so far. So yeah, it was just really good to see the benchmarks kind of reflect that decision. And I guess the last bit of news, so I did try it against actual live players. I think it went something like 3 for 7 and ended up with an ELO about 1036. So still clearly not up to a human standard of playing, but yeah, we'll see what we can do to fix that. So that's it for now. I will keep everyone posted with more updates.